According to Luke. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Good morning. Good to be with you here at Ezekiel this morning. In this Lenten season, in this springtime in the life of the church, this time of prayer and reflection, a time of renewal, perhaps renewed energy in the familiar things that you do, all for the sake of faith, the life of the church, and the mission in which Christ sends us out. Thank you to Pastor Mark and Minister Kim for the invitation to be with you this morning in the many things that I do in the work of the Synod in partnership with Bishop Laurie and our Synod team. Coming to worship with the congregations of the Synod, the privilege of being able to preach and proclaim is one of the bright spots and one of the things that we do from week in and week out as we visit the many congregations that bring us meaning and sense of encouragement and stir within us our own sense of hope for what is yet to be in the life of the church. So thank you for your hospitality, for the opportunity to be here. Bishop Laurie and our Synod team bring greetings and thank you for your partnership in ministry, for all that you do day to day, for the many and varied gifts that you share, for your generosity, for your willingness to take that faith and to turn it out into the community and to the world for the sake of God's love for the world. So thank you. As I visit congregations, it's really fun to experience the very spirit of worship that emerges really contextually within particular settings and within their sense of tradition and what it is that we treasure as we gather together as God's people. One of the hardest things, though, is getting used to walking into a different pulpit. For 32 some years, I served in parish ministry, and I got accustomed to knowing exactly where my Alban stole were every Sunday morning. And I think about 50% of the time when I drive away from my home to travel to a congregation on a Sunday morning, I have left my all behind, only to turn around and go back to have to get it. So we get into our patterns and routines, and we get accustomed to the space and even the microphone. So if I seem a little awkward at first, forgive me. Usually by the time I'm 25 minutes into my sermon, I'm feeling at home. As I travel around the Synod working with congregations in transition, first and foremost, it is a privilege and honor to be in partnership with the church in that way. And it is a true honor to hear the stories that emerge when congregations are anticipating change. As difficult as change can be, as congregations anticipate something new on the horizon, times of transition, a natural tendency to glance backwards can bring, well, with it, understandably so, a sense of gratitude, a perspective of what has been and what has led congregations and pastors and leadership to a particular place and time And wherever there is gratitude, I have noticed there is newfound energy. And while the future in times of transition is yet to be defined, still, there can be a feeling and even a trust that the Spirit is at work as the Spirit has always been at work. The Spirit continues to be at work. And that in time, because the Spirit is at work, the way forward will be open. Prompted by some simple questions as I visit councils and call committees and congregations, I've noticed the stories quickly come to the forefront. They're ready to be told. They're ready to be heard and celebrated. They're ready to be pondered and to be seen as inspiration. And Minister Kim told me before, as we were walking in the sacristy getting ready for worship this morning, that the tradition here at Lent is to hear everyone's face stories, or to hear face stories during the season of renewal as people step up and do that. And I get to enter into hearing some of those stories in congregations as they anticipate the next things. And I can tell you, and maybe you've heard this in your Lenten experience, there are common themes to all of our faith stories. The themes that I've heard speak to the vitality of meaningful relationships. Both relationships, friendships that have been around for a long time, and newfound relationships and friendships and connections in the life of the church. The stories capture themes, not only the vitality of such relationships, but the quality, the character of those relationships that flourish in the life of healthy congregations, where there is a commitment to others, a commitment to the ministry and mission of the church, understanding the church as a place of belonging, a caring community where the care cannot be contained but spills over beyond the walls of the congregation. The stories, if you listen close enough, they especially tell of the regular, if you will, unspectacular work that unfolds beautifully, marvelously, with wonder over time. Not to be seen or recognized immediately, but over time, something worth beholding for the sake of encouragement toward the future. You can say this daily faith, hidden in the ordinary, with a willingness to be present for others, is what makes a difference and has a lasting impact. In one way or the other, the stories start out like this. I remember when such and such was happening in my life, and there were people in the church who were really there. They just showed up. They were there for me or for my family, for those that I cared about, with a needed kindness and support. Or they say something like this: I remember when I was asked to help with something. Someone had the nerve to come and say, will you do this? Will you take on this role? And I had no choice but to say yes. And I responded, and it has made a difference as I have become involved in the work of the church, in the mission of the gospel. You know the stories. You've heard them. You tell them. You've shared them. And it is a privilege of mine as a synod minister to hear them in many and varied places. And I am grateful for them. Which now leads me to the gospel. I was told once by a mentor of mine when I started preaching, I was told that I needed to get to the point much earlier in my preaching, and my introductions were way too long. So forgive me for that long introduction. I've never been able to shake that, but I am getting to the gospel, and I hope that you can see some connections to what I've just said. For the Gospel of Luke, that little bit of the passage that we have in front of us today, that Gospel of Luke is clear about the future bent of Jesus' ministry. Clear, it is toward Jerusalem, isn't it? At this point in time, in all that Jesus is doing, and all that Jesus is connecting with, Jesus is moving toward Jerusalem. And it will take some time to do so, according to the Gospel of Luke. But what happens on the way as Jesus moves toward Jerusalem, as Jesus has set his face toward Jerusalem, and is now moving in that direction, what happens along the way is no small thing. It is significant. It is impactful. It is worth remembering in light of what happens at the end of the gospel. As we know, the gospels are a narrative, a flow, and we need to make the connections of one piece of that narrative to the other. So what happens from this passage forward is significant. What happens on the way gives us a glimpse in this Lenten time into the very depth of God's love. Into the depth of God's love that is revealed then, the end of the gospel, that is revealed in the death and resurrection of Jesus. If you will, there is an arc. There is an arc to the story. There is an arc to the work of Jesus that is marked by mystery and mercy. And we get a glimpse of that in our story today and what Jesus said. We get a glimpse into this mystery, into this mercy, into the person of Jesus and the work of Jesus. So for some 10 chapters after this one, we learn of Jesus' works of healings and his teachings. Keep in mind that after this chapter, as Jesus moves toward Jerusalem, the reader hears the stories of Zacchaeus. You know, all these very familiar stories that we love in the Gospel of Luke. We hear the stories of Zacchaeus, the Good Samaritan, and the prodigal son. Interesting what happens when Jesus moves toward Jerusalem. What he does and what he says. We learn of the way mercy restores, mends what is broken. Not only individually, but if we pay close attention, we see that there is a restoring and a mending to what is broken, even into the fabric of community. In these stories, we learn just how Jesus is with others in their struggles and sufferings. Remember that long introduction about our faith stories and how the common themes are about how we end up being with one another in the daily routines and in our human needs. In these stories that we hear in the Gospel of Luke, we learn just how Jesus is with others in their struggles and sufferings, and this is no small thing. We see how Jesus meets the longing of human hearts with love, with transforming love, with surprising, unexpected love, but love that is real and changes things. We see how Jesus meets us with love and a promise, steadfast promise toward wholeness. What Jesus says in our gospel today is a kind of lament. As Minister Kim mentioned in her children's sermon this morning, this image that really catches our attention in this Lenten time as we think about our living relationship with God, God's relationship with us, this image of the hen. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Interesting image as Jesus moves toward Jerusalem. the image of a hen gathering the little ones under her wings. I think what gets expressed here, at least what I feel in this text, in this image that gets our attention in the Lenten time, what gets expressed here, I think, is tenderness. The very depth again of Jesus' desire to be in relationship with you and me and the world. We feel a persistent hope for returning to the gift of belonging when we think of the hen and the wings and being in community. And so if this is kind of a lament, remember that laments always serve as a way of naming the realities, the difficult realities of life, but all the while holding fast to God's promise. A lament permits our honest questions about where God is in any given moment, all for the sake of faith. And I think laments also indicate that God never gives up on relationship. And they help us stay connected in conversation and in relationship with God. As a hen gathers her brood under her wings. Today we hear the summons in these words to return from whatever has kept us from the richness of faith and our love toward our neighbor, whatever our failings or our worries, our home is where God gathers us in. And wherever God sends us out, places, real places, where we move and have our being, and where forgiveness and mercy and strength reside. As a hen gathers her brood under her wings, our home in God's love. So I'm closing now. Reassure you that my conclusions are much shorter than my introductions. As we listen closely to the voice of God, through the many and varied stories of congregational life, we learn to trust again that what we do today and what we do tomorrow truly matters. Regardless of how quiet or inconspicuous or small the actions, we trust that God gathers them all up and makes of them gifts of the kingdom for you and me and for the world. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, to connect with you, to share in worship, and to have a chance to meet many of you this morning. Again, thank you for your ministry, for the faith that continues to flourish in your midst as you do the work of ministry today and anticipate the work that will need to be done tomorrow.